Six Flags Great Adventure is set to debut a multi-record breaking launch coaster as the replacement for Kingda Ka, which unfortunately closed for good at the end of 2024. The replacement roller coaster was originally announced to open in 2026, but we'll have to see about when it will actually open, whether that will be later in 2026 or even in 2027. And just a heads up, it does seem like 2027 is what's more likely at the current moment. Anyway, Hollywood Studios recently captured this awesome drone footage of the construction site of what should be the new roller coaster. Be sure to go like, comment, subscribe to Hollywood Studios if you haven't already. But this footage definitely sheds some interesting light on the coaster and may even confirm what it is. The leading rumor for what the replacement coaster will be is a Mack Tower coaster, which was originally found on a park survey for I believe Kings Island, asking guests what kind of ride they would like to see added to their park. If you're unfamiliar with the concept, the Mack Tower coaster should be another strata coaster, meaning just like Kingda Ka, it will be over 400 feet in height. The ride will also utilize Mack's extreme spinner trains, which are used on rides like Time Traveler at Silver Dollar City or Ride to Happiness at Plopsa Land at Pana, and both of those coasters are highly regarded. Using the survey, ML Designs on YouTube put together this pre-creation of what the Mack Tower coaster could look like. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe to ML Designs also if you haven't already. But in short, the ride is basically built in a straight line, and consists of an initial launch that leads into a zero-G stall. But the zero-G stall has an awesome twist and features an upside down launch. The train then drops out of the stall into a third launch and then ascends a 400-foot tall tower. And then unlike Kingda Ka, the ride is not a complete circuit and actually a shuttle coaster. So the train will reach the top and run out of speed, then roll back down the tower, at which point it then completes the circuit in reverse and then returns to the station. You'll also see that ML Designs incorporated a dual load station so that the ride can run two trains even though it's a shuttle coaster. Unlike the Flash Vertical Velocity, which opened this year at Six Flags Great Adventure and is also a shuttle coaster but can only run one train. And from what I've heard behind the scenes, the Mack Tower coaster is meant to run two trains. I'll dig a little more into that later in the video. Now going back to the construction update filmed by Colin at Hollywood Studios, a good amount of the ride's foundations are in the process of being constructed, and I'm quite confident that the placement and orientation of the foundations basically confirms that this is a Mack Tower coaster. Outlined in pink, we see the initial launch, and then the cutouts in the parking lot suggest that this is where the inverted launch will be built. So in my opinion, so far the construction looks like it's aligning exactly with the rumors, and there's a couple more interesting things that we can find by just looking at the construction so far. One is that the ride is not being built in a straight line. ML Designs made their pre-creation in a straight line, and I would have assumed the same also. It would make sense that the ride would primarily be built on Kingda Ka's former plot, but you'll notice that it looks like the ride will actually begin closer to the boardwalk section, and then it looks like the initial launch will take place where Scream Machine's first drop used to be located, and then the track will curve slightly to the right into the inverted launch. And one of the first things that popped into my head when I saw this is that the ride is currently not using any of Kingda Ka's land, and I honestly think it was designed that way for a reason. I have a feeling that off the shelf, the ride was probably built in a straight line, but when Great Adventure purchased it, Mack and the park worked to reconfigure the ride around Kingda Ka at least somewhat, so that they could more closely stagger the closing of Kingda Ka with the opening of this new roller coaster. Analyzing further, the park has had this section of the parking lot closed off since the beginning of this year, and I never knew exactly why it was closed in this configuration. I figured it primarily had to do with the demolition of Kingda Ka, but the new roller coaster is actually following the footprint of the closed part of the parking lot. And you'll notice that up higher in the parking lot, this fence curves back in towards Kingda Ka's plot. And either the fencing will expand later in the season, or I believe the ride will actually come out of the inverted launch and turn right towards Kingda Ka's plot. This will be followed by a third launch, and then I'm guessing the tower will be placed somewhat around where Kingda Ka's top hat was. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, in that rather than building the coaster in a straight line, a decision was made to build the ride's initial section around Kingda Ka so that the ride's construction could be split into several phases, and that the section of foundations we have today could be built with Kingda Ka still present, meaning Kingda Ka could have potentially kept running, and maybe that was the initial plan. At least if there was a good plan to start with. Now the way Kingda Ka's top hat was demolished probably would not align with this, as it would be extremely risky to implode and basically knock over the top hat, and then potentially have parts of the top hat fall on top of or collide with whatever of the new roller coaster was built. Unless of course there was another plan to deconstruct Kingda Ka piece by piece, but we'll never really know that. This design of the new coaster could have also allowed for Kingda Ka to be demolished while construction took place. But in either scenario, basically means that the closing of Kingda Ka and the opening of the new roller coaster could have been very close together. And something else that's funny about this is that Great Adventure is yet again digging into their parking lot to build this roller coaster. Sarajevo Bobsleds was built in the parking lot. Great American Scream Machine expanded on that plot and continued further into the parking lot. Superman Ultimate Flight absolutely juts out into the parking lot. When Green Lantern was built, that further increased the size of Superman's jut out into the parking lot. And then of course Kingda Ka was also a parking lot coaster. And so just like tradition, the new roller coaster is yet again taking up part of the parking lot. But anyway, the configuration of the new ride looks like it will place it much more within the park. And that's because this here looks to be the ride station, and you'll see that it's located just off the boardwalk, which I'm assuming will also mean the ride's entrance will be placed here. And overall, this should make the ride a lot more accessible to guests. Whereas Kingda Ka's entrance is always pretty far off the park's main pathways in a dead end, which I never really thought was a great placement. So placing the new coaster's station and entrance in the boardwalk will probably make it far more popular. And it also opens up basically all of the former Golden Kingdom for any sort of future expansion. And I really hope this space is utilized for awesome additions in the future. And then speaking of popularity, this is where I think the ride may have a slight advantage compared to what we saw in ML Design's pre-creation. And I'm not knocking that pre-creation at all. I would have basically assumed the same for the ride to have a track switch like Kingda Ka did into one of the two stations. Looking at what is most likely the ride's station foundations, you'll see that there's 2 rows of 5-footers. And if we were to have 2 stationary station tracks, the placement of the foundations would suggest the tracks would be oriented like this, but that puts them perpendicular to the ride's main track. So I'm pretty confident that what we're looking at is actually a transfer table station, just like what we see on the Mr. Freeze coasters at Six Flags Over Texas and Six Flags St. Louis. So with this configuration, a transfer table would be built across the foundations, and then the station tracks would run in the same direction of the main track. There would be 2 station tracks, and the tracks would slide to the left or the right to load and unload with new riders, just like on Mr. Freeze. And this gives you a couple advantages, as this ride will no doubt be very popular and it's going to need to chew through a large amount of riders. An advantage you get with transfer tables is that both tracks are able to slide at the same time. This has been used on the Mr. Freezes for years, and as one train returns from the circuit and parks on the transfer table, that track can slide over into its load position while the other track slides into the main launch, allowing both trains to launch as close as possible to each other, which maximizes the amount of launches every hour. Whereas if the ride had a track switch in front of the station, each train would have to wait until the other train fully enters its load station, and then for the track switch to slide to the next position. Only then could that train dispatch out of the station into the main circuit. A more traditional track switch would also not allow for trains to launch directly out of the station. Each train would need to slowly dispatch into the main circuit and then be launched. And then the same would have to repeat when the ride returns to the station. It would need to hit a controlled rate of speed and then slowly re-enter the station. Whereas with transfer tables, the ride can just launch right out of the station and then more quickly return back to the station since it's traveling in a straight line. The new coaster will absolutely use LSMs, and the LSMs could assist to quickly move the train into the station, further reducing the amount of idle time between each launch. So if you ask me if this is true that the ride will use a transfer table for the station, this will be an awesome feature, and it should help the ride gain somewhat of a high capacity for what it is at least, as I'm assuming we'll only see trains of 16 or 20 riders. Now Mack has also used turntables in many of their recent rides, like on Aquaman Power Wave at Six Flags Over Texas, which is also a shuttle coaster, but can run 2 boats on the track thanks to the turntable. But the alignment of foundations for the main track does not support a turntable, as the main track would need to enter the station more towards the right or left of the station foundations, but you'll see that it enters right in the middle, just like it does on Mr. Freeze. Now if you're a track switch lover, fear not, as the ride does appear like it will still have a traditional track switch, and that should be to what looks like will be the ride's storage track shown here in green. Based on the foundations, it looks like the storage track will be a single track, and these additional footers to the left and right could be to enclose the storage track. Or in the best case scenario, the ride is actually a full circuit coaster and this is where trains will return to the station through. But I highly doubt it because the foundations just cut off and the overall orientation of this just perfectly aligns for this to be a storage track. So with that, I think that'll do it for this video. These are just a few interesting interesting things that I've noticed so far, and be sure to comment down below anything else that you notice about the construction, or comment below what you think about the overall situation. Like all of you, I'll definitely have my eyes peeled for any sort of construction update that we may get, as even if the ride is delayed and the official announcement doesn't come until a later date, I think the construction will continue to give away more and more about what this new roller coaster will be. So with that, thank you everyone for watching, and I hope that this video was somewhat useful to you. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more nerdy content just like this. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.